Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dori Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host for the series. So now let me introduce our wonderful guest. Maddy Dychtwald is an internationally acclaimed author, public speaker, and thought leader on longevity, aging, the new retirement, and the ascent of women. She co-founded AgeWave, the world's leader in understanding and addressing the far-reaching impacts of our aging population, and has led numerous acclaimed studies on women and money. In addition, she's been involved in more than 25 thought leadership research studies worldwide, focusing on aging, longevity, retirement, health, family, caregiving, housing, and leisure, which have cumulatively garnered more than 14 billion media impressions. She's been featured in Bloomberg, Businessweek, Forbes, Newsweek, Time, Fox Business News, CNBC, and NPR, and many others. She's written many blog posts for the Wall Street Journal and Huffington Post. Maddy's also author of 3 previous books. One is called Influence: How Women's Soaring Economic Power Will Transform Our World for the Better. Gideon's Dream: A Tale of New Beginnings. It's a children's book. And Cycles: How We Will Live, Work, and Buy. Her most recent book, Ageless in America, A Woman's Guide to Increasing Healthspan, Brainspan, and Lifespan, was just published May 14th. So it's brand new, and we get to celebrate the book and Maddy and her wonderful research. And she lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her family, and many of you have heard and have read probably Ken Dychtwald, her husband, and together they founded AgeWave. Maddy, I am so delighted that your book is out and you're here. And I just wanted to mention before I start asking questions and all, just to comment that I just so resonated with your book. It's really excellent. It's like a tour de force because you have just so extensively researched it, interviewed some amazing people, and cover so many areas. So I think that women, and I think also men, will find it extremely helpful. So I just want to congratulate you on your really wonderful book.
Oh, thank you so much, Dori. Yeah, I'm really super excited about the book. We just, in the first week out, we made the national bestseller list for USA Today and Publishers Weekly. So I don't think you're alone in saying that, yeah, this resonates with people. It's women in particular. And I think that while there's some information in there for men, I think that men really need to recognize the fact that women do have different needs than men. And this is a great thing to share with the women that they love and care about.
I totally agree. And I think some of what I found really important too, that hopefully we'll be able to talk about today too, is that up until not so long ago, women really weren't included in research studies. So much about women was based on studies with men. And luckily that's changing. So,
but it's changing slowly. It wasn't until 2016 that the FDA said to pharma companies, yeah, you ought to include women in your clinical trials. And they still don't always do it, but they're certainly moving in that direction. So that is very good news for all of us.
I always like to start with, why did you write this book? Because I know you've written some other books, and I know some of the things we'll be talking about probably will expand on it. But what motivated you to write this book now?
Yeah, I've been on this beat of aging, longevity, and retirement, as you probably know, for close to 40 years. And I've been so lucky that we've dug deep into the subject at AgeWave through the research and thought leadership work that we do. But along the way, I've had the great opportunity to talk to some of the leaders in the field, academicians, scientists, researchers, physicians, and I always ask them, like, what are your insider secrets to living longer, better, or even living better longer? And it's so interesting because people are very willing to share their insights. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I had the bandwidth to sit down and look around and see what kind of books are out there on longevity. And there are a lot of books out there on longevity, but I noticed that there were very few to none that were written by women for women. I also noticed that there were a lot of books on sleep or exercise or nutrition, but none of the books on longevity, or few of the books on longevity, took the sort of holistic point of view that it's not just about one thing, like diet or exercise or even something like purpose, but it's about a bouquet of different ingredients that all work together. They're not in silos, they impact each other. And just as an example, if you start eating a healthier diet, chances are that your sleep is going to improve. If your sleep improves, you're going to have more energy and vitality to exercise, and so on. I wanted to correct this. I wanted to write a book by me, which is a woman, for women, and focus on this holistic recipe, if you will, for living better longer. And I wanted to clear up the confusion because there is so much misinformation out there. I wanted to offer some clear knowledge and information. And I also wanted to provide women with some action steps that they could take right here and right now, and many of which don't cost a penny. So that was my goal.
That's great. And I think you really accomplished it. To just mention to people that there's a beginning section, and then in this holistic kind of approach that Maddie's just mentioned, there's fitness, food, sleep. We're the CEO of our own healthcare. Hormones are your frenemies. Beautiful mind, purpose and connection, wealth and health connection, and ageless aging plan. And in each chapter, I just want to give the overview of that for people. In each chapter, there really are, just as Maddie was saying, practical steps, tips, references to people. So it'd be a course in itself, and I think probably a good book for book groups and all too.
Thank you.
People go along. So I think it's really good. How did you come up with the term ageless aging, and what does that mean exactly?
I originally came up with the term when I was giving a presentation, a keynote, to a group of very high level executive women who were probably in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And I was at the Golden Door, and we were brainstorming how women get a lot of shade, if you will, thrown at them as they get older, that there's more ageism thrown to women than men. And we were trying to come up with a way of describing this journey of lifelong aging in a way that felt authentic to us. We realized that we didn't like the term anti-aging at all because that's really old school and doesn't really pertain to what I was trying to convey. We looked up the word ageless, which came up in our conversation in the dictionary, and what we saw, the very first word was timeless. And I loved that. I thought, you know what? We can't hold back the hands of time. But what we can do is make the most of the time we have on this earth and potentially even reverse some of the negative impact that time has had on our bodies, on our minds, even on our spirits. So, just as an example, if, for instance, let's say you have arthritis, which we know is an anti-inflammatory disease. It's an inflammatory disease. So going on to an anti-inflammatory diet, it can actually reverse some of the symptoms. That's a pretty cool concept. If we've never exercised before, we may be able to help some of the muscle mass loss that comes as early as in our 30s to be reversed. So there are so many choices and so many steps we can take to be more ageless, to not let our chronology or the number of birthdays that we've had really define who we are in the world. That's what we came up with.
Which is great. And I think you talk about I'm just trying to remember different ways of thinking about our age. Maybe this would be a good time to talk about it because I think our chronological age is just one piece of it. Could
That's
you
right.
maybe expand on different ways to think about our age?
Sure. Keep in mind that aging is a lifelong process. It actually begins in the womb and goes to the day we die. But there are at least three different kinds of aging, and one we already touched on. That's the chronologic aging, or the number of birthdays that you have. And that's one way to define aging, but there are two other ways. And one of them is a very positive look at aging, and that is our emotional or psychological aging. And frankly, that actually can improve as we get older. We can gain, not all of us, but some of us gain some wisdom, and we certainly gain experience. And from some of the studies that have been done, that we've done at AgeWave, but that have also been done at Stanford, we know that the levels of happiness actually go up in our 50s and 60s, and even our levels of resilience. One of the studies that we've done at AgeWave quite recently pointed out that during COVID, it was younger people who really suffered with mental and emotional issues, whereas older adults had a sense of resilience. They've been through bad things happening before. Maybe it's an economic downturn. Maybe it's coping with a horrible disease. And they know that you can get to the other side of that. So that resilience is really a strength that comes with getting older. So that's the more emotional or psychological side of aging. And the third side is the one that we really think about quite often, and that's the physical or biologic aging. And that's what's going on inside your body. And there are tests that we can take now that exist that can measure, like, how are your organs doing in terms of aging. I recently took one of these tests, and it could be give you a positive point of view about your aging, or it can also give you a motivation to age differently. I'm 74 years old, and my internal physiologic or biologic aging came back as I was 51. So for me, it's oh, yay, I'm celebrating. I'm doing all the right things. But because I'm doing many of the things that I talk about in ageless aging, I felt like it confirms many of the steps that I suggest to women.
And part of what I think is so lovely about the book is you really do share a lot from your own personal experiences and what things you've done, what's helped, what hasn't helped.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it got me thinking about a lot of things that I've done and not done. And I do remember in my more recent bone density, I'm a few years older than you are. I'm 78 now. And
Congratulations.
thank you. But although after menopause, it does change a little bit. I'm still told that my bones, thank goodness, because of, I think, the exercise that I do, that I have bones like somebody, much younger, 30 years younger, 40 years.
Oh, that's incredible.
And which has been helpful because now that I have a puppy that's pulled me over a few times, I haven't broken anything. I'm so
That's
thankful.
really
The book gets you thinking about the things you have or haven't done or want to do too. But let me go back to the beginning part, and then we'll get into the more specifics of which you've begun with. And I think it's so important. But you really put the book in the context of the importance of this longevity revolution, and as you said before, of really wanting to live and have a good health span in addition to the number of years. Tell me why, and tell the listeners why it's so important that women be in the forefront of that. Because I think your points are so important about that.
No, thank you. Yeah, we are in the beginning stages of a longevity revolution. We've never seen so many older adults ever before in the history of the world. So that's a great piece of information to hold on to. And what's really interesting is that women have won the longevity lottery. We live on average 6 years longer than men. In many ways, we ought to be leading this longevity revolution. Now, there is a challenge that women face. Just to put it into context, we used to think that our genetic package was kind of our destiny. Whatever our parents and grandparents had to cope with as they got older were probably the things we were going to cope with. But you know what? Science has told us, the most recent science coming from Calico Labs tells us that up to 90%, now let me repeat that number, up to 90% of our health and being is within our control, having to do with the way we live our lives and our environment. And to me, that's like a gift because frankly, I have a really bad genetics package. And if I couldn't do anything about it, I'd give up. To know that we have control is a huge issue. But, and there is a big but here, the challenge that women face is that while we live longer than men, when it comes to health span, which is the number of healthy years that we live, our health spans, we're not doing as well as men. Men actually do better when it comes to their health, to matching their health spans to their lifespans. And the good news is that now we know that we have these tools, these things that we can do in our lifestyle and in our environment to really make changes to better match our health spans to our lifespan. And I would even take it one step further. I would say that because women, and I'm sure you know this story, are twice as likely to suffer from cognitive decline as men, we can do something about that as well. And that is great news.
What's your sense on why, first of all, I should say the 90 amount that's lifestyle choices is mind boggling. I always thought it was 70-30, but I know
Yeah,
you're
that's
the
what
more
it was
recent
for a long
researcher.
way. I know it's the most recent science too. It's almost overwhelming to think, wow, we are really in the driver's seat when it comes. Now, of course, if you have a brain tumor or something, that is not your fault. So it's not to suggest that's your fault, but it does give us a lot more control over how we feel and look and behave as we get older.
Oh, absolutely. So why do you think women tend to be sick longer? I think there was a quote, I was actually referring to another book as I remember, but it was a quote that men die quicker, but women are
Get
sicker.
sicker. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you speak to why do you think that is the case?
Dory, as you mentioned earlier, I interviewed almost 100 different experts for this book, and no one had a clear answer. Many people speculate, or many of the experts speculate, that it has to do with the fact that women don't get diseases like heart disease and stroke until 10 years later than men, which sounds intuitive, but and because we're protected by our estrogen. And then when our estrogen levels deplete, these diseases come on very quickly and often go unnoticed. Um, I believe from all the people I've spoken to that one of the things that's really key to this is that women are very busy taking care of the health and well-being of their spouse partners, their parents, their in-laws, their children, their grandchildren, and they're so busy caring for everyone else that they let their own health maybe go to the side. And that's not a good thing. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can better take care of all these other people in our lives. So those are two possible reasons. Again, there's no science to
Right.
back it up completely.
Yeah. That's helpful though to think about. They always say put your oxygen on first. I think it's probably
That's
in
a really
terms of,
good point.
yeah,
Yes.
it's, tied in to take care of yourself. And still, you can help take care of others, but there's got to be some me time to take care of yourself too.
You got to
Um,
prioritize that. Yeah.
yeah, and you really do talk about that in the book. So I know I mentioned the kind of chapters in your book, but I know you really talk about this holistic recipe. And so I think it would be helpful to talk about what are the important ingredients. And yeah, I love when I was reading in the book, I love the book, The Stone Soup. I used to read that with my son all the time. And I know you use that little tale to talk a little about kind of the holistic ingredients. Maybe you could just real quickly share the little folktale and how it relates to your idea about all these important ingredients in our life.
Sure. Sure. I think most of your listeners are familiar with the whole stone soup book and concept. The idea that you can start with just plain old water and ask everyone to add an ingredient, and they all bring just a little something to this soup. And the soup suddenly becomes this delicious, nutritious meal that can be shared with everyone. And I love that concept. What I really began to recognize is, yeah, there are some basics, and we ought to know the basics, and they're not sexy, but they're important. And the number one basic is something that you alluded to before, Dory, and that's exercise. From talking to the various experts that I spoke to, if there were to be a silver bullet in terms of our longevity and our health span and brain span increasing, it would definitely be exercise. And by the way, there's 6 different kinds of exercise that become super important as you get older. So if anyone's like me, I was a cardio junkie until I hit my 50s and recognized the fact that, oh my God, I better do something about building some muscle strength, because muscle strength actually is the number one kind of exercise that we all should be doing. In fact, some of the experts I spoke to said that they thought that muscle strength should be a new vital sign, similar to like blood pressure or heart rate. So it's all that important. So, yeah, exercise is the top of the heap. And by the way, the impact it can have on our brain health is pretty phenomenal. So I would start there. But then again, when it comes to basics, don't forget about nutrition. Getting rid of the bad is as important as putting in the good. Get rid of those ultra processed foods. Really limit sugar. I personally eat a anti-inflammatory diet, but you don't have to do that. That's my choice because I was struggling, as you read in the book, with terrible hip pain, and found out that I literally was bone on bone in both my hips. And had to get surgery, but couldn't get it for months because of the doctor's schedule. I had to do 2 hips at once, and there's only a few doctors that can actually do that successfully. So I asked the doctor, what should I do? And he told me to get a cane. I was a little frustrated. I reached out to some of the experts that I was familiar with, people like Mark Hyman and Andy Weil, and a psychiatrist at Boston and Women's Hospital. And they suggested a few things, one being the anti-inflammatory diet, which is no gluten, no dairy, and very little to no sugar. So I cut those out for literally a few weeks. And after 6 weeks, all the pain in my hips went away. So that's why I'm a big fan of the anti-inflammatory diet. But for most people, I always suggest eat the rainbow. Eat as many colorful fruits, vegetables, and whole grains as you can. What else? Sleep. We know that sleep is an essential ingredient because when you go to sleep at night, that's when your brain can actually clean out the trash, if you will. And you want to get rid of the toxins that build up in your brain. It's really important for brain health. But what I learned along the way is that most of the sleep science is based on major studies that were done, and those major studies did not include people over the age of 65, which is, I think, crazy, but that's the reality. What else? I also meditate every day. I think that meditation or some kind of mental wellness is a really important ingredient that we need to include. I think you mentioned it before, the idea of owning your own health and healthcare or being the CEO of it. I think it's really important to put together a team, if you will, of certainly a primary care physician that you know and trust, and that you can relate to and communicate with on a regular basis so that you can manage anything that comes up. And let's be honest about it. As we get older, things come up. There's no doubt about it.
For sure.
Should I keep going, or is that like a good
Yeah,
start?
no, no, that's a great start, but you can keep going and mentioning the others, and then we'll.
Yeah, those are the basics that you really
Mhm.
want to take care of. But then there's a lot of other ingredients. For instance, our social connections. We've been hearing more about this since COVID because the we've heard that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, that's crazy. Social connections really matter. And by the way, they don't have to be like having a million friends that you relate to. If you have a few close friends that you really care about, that can work really well. But the idea that you might be far better off having social connections in your life than you realize. It really makes a difference. And by the way, if you can combine some of your ingredients, for instance, taking a walk with a friend is a really terrific way of really maximizing your health span. So that's just one example. Our hormones, you mentioned a little bit about that earlier. There's so much misinformation about menopause, and we're hearing more and more conversation about menopause, but we need to hear even more. It's a really important piece of information. And if I were to give your listeners one piece of advice about that, is that find yourself a menopause specialist, because many gynecologists are not aware of the most recent science in terms of hormone replacement. And there's such a huge amount of misinformation on this that even is owned by doctors. It's something that really gets me crazy. What else
Yeah,
do we know?
I want to stay with that for a minute if you could, just because
Yeah, for sure.
I know I was finding that really interesting and helpful to read. And also, one person, Sarah Yogoff, who wasn't able to be here, she sent me an email. She said, please be sure to ask Maddie about the hormone issues. I think many people on the call, I know myself included, really got impacted by that, where I
Yeah.
was taking it and then stopped because of all those studies. And then I would really became an unhappy camper. And I still at times have night sweats, which is
Oh,
about.
yeah.
And so could you just maybe talk a little about some of what you've learned of how people are beginning to think about it? But I do want to underscore trying to get a doctor that deals with aging and also specifically menopause.
Yes,
That's
I
really
would.
important. But
Well,
yeah.
there is a website. I can give it to you afterwards. I don't have it at the tip of my fingers, and I don't want to give you any misinformation. But yeah, there's a list of menopause specialists, and they're all over the United States. I would strongly urge women, no matter if they're in their 40s or if they're in their 70s, to seek out a menopause specialist. These are physicians who are not focused on delivering babies, but on keeping women healthy as they get older. And that's really what you want. Yeah, lots of information out there. Uh, Many physicians, old school physicians in many instances, think about menopause and they say, oh, it's just an inconvenience. You have some symptoms that you have to deal with short term. Get over it. That is not the case at all. Uh, just to give you like a quick tour through the many systems and tissues that are impacted, our brain health and our cognitive function. Declining estrogen, it's associated with a decrease in memory and cognitive function. And as I said earlier, women are twice as likely to suffer from cognitive decline as men. And you don't want that to happen. So that's a really important piece. The loss of hormonal homeostasis, it can actually trigger the liver to make too much cholesterol and triglycerides and even become insulin resistant. And yeah, you don't want to go there. You mentioned bone density before.
Right.
When you start to go through perimenopause, you can have you can have a very quick loss of bone health. Your bone loss can go very rapidly, which is not what you want to have happen because, as you said, then you can, if you have a fall, just walking your dog, or if you skip a step someplace, you could actually break a hip, and you don't want that to be happening. Our microbiome, our gut wall integrity, really impacted by the loss of estrogen. And more and more science is coming out to say that yes, there is a gut brain connection. We're not exactly sure how the two interact, but we know it's an integral part of brain health. So you don't want that to happen. Muscle tone, we covered that a little bit already. Metabolic health, I'm sure every woman who's on this call who has gone through menopause has recognized the fact that, yeah, you know what? My metabolism really began to change as I started to lose estrogen. And you can really gain that belly fat and waist circumference, which, by the way, really can, it's actually a sign of potential heart disease. That's not a good thing. You can get down to other things like the mitochondrial function. I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but it's the way our mitochondria actually interact in our body. It produces the energy that fuels nearly every single bodily process. So without enough estradiol, mitochondria cannot get rid of the metabolic waste products that build up in our body. And that is not something that you want to have happen. And then, of course, something that I bet many of your listeners have had to deal with, and I know I have, and that is that our circadian rhythms get all messed up. And sleep becomes a huge challenge. Yeah, see, these are just some of the things that can happen to us if we are not doing hormone replacement. And so I feel like I'm just putting out a lot of information.
It is, but I think really important information and speaks to how important I think the contribution of your book is. And I also want to encourage people who are listening live to submit any questions you have so that I can integrate them into the discussion with Maddie. All of the things that you're talking about are so important, and it really is impressive that you combine what a lot of experts say and a lot of the research and the fact that menopausal hormone replacement therapy is something available again now. I know it wasn't, and I know, at least for my age, once you went off, and it was felt not to be safe to go back on, but it is something important to talk about with your doctor. And there
Yeah,
really are,
definitely.
as you say, probably if people even just Google menopause specialists in their area, they could probably find a list of OB gynecologists that really specialize in this. I had a wonderful one who retired, and I kept finding people who just they could care less about me and my age. They really just wanted to help people have babies, and I understand,
Yeah.
that's a wonderful thing. But when we get older, we need something else.
That's
Um,
exactly right. I just want to add one thing here, Dory. Much of this
please.
misinformation, and it's well-meaning physicians in many instances, and they're going back to the Women's Health Initiative study that was a very flawed study, but it really transformed the public perception on hormone replacement, which used to be the go-to, but the study was done, by the way, on women over the age of which who had never been on hormones before. And that's an important piece of the puzzle because what we find is, and you just hinted at it, is that if you start hormone replacement after the age of 65, that's when there's some potential challenges. So you want to start it early. And you also want to keep in mind that this flawed study used synthetic hormones that came from, let me see if I'm getting this 100%, from estrogen from pregnant horses' urine. So think about that for a minute. That's gross. It's not the kind of hormones you want to put in your body. Today, there are FDA-approved bioidentical hormones. That's what you want to do. You do not want the synthetic ones. You need to ask for bioidentical, and you likely want to use an estrogen or an estradiol to come in a non-oral formulation, such as a patch. I'm 74. I've been on hormone replacement since I've was right around the age of 50, and I use a patch all the time. And it's better to start hormone replacement early. Uh, Now, of course, if you have breast cancer or any other kinds of reproductive related cancers in your family, then you really want to go to a menopause specialist because there are some answers, although they may not be the typical answer that would be given to most women. So, no, I urge people to see this menopause specialist.
I think that's really important advice. Let's come back to some of the other parts of the ingredients that we haven't gotten to yet, because I know you've mentioned about finances being an important one too,
Yeah,
and our mind, and so can you talk a little more about that, those ingredients, sort of what you've
sure.
been learning?
A couple of the ingredients I haven't focused on yet is the whole idea of brain span or the number of healthy years that our brain functions. And I know I've mentioned a few times because it's something that's really important to me, and that is brain health. Women need to care about this more than men. And by the way, they do. Women, from studies we've done at AgeWave, if you ask women, what is your biggest health fear? It's cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease. More scary to them, more worried about getting Alzheimer's disease than having a stroke or heart disease or even cancer. And it's that important. It used to be thought that there was nothing you could do at all because there is no cure right now for Alzheimer's disease. That's an important thing to keep in mind. But the most recent science does tell us that there are things we can do to either delay or prevent the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And you want to do those things. And some of them we've already talked about: the exercise, the sleep, the diet. These things are critical. But you know what? So are the social connections and having a sense of purpose. And yeah, these things all matter for our brain health. And I talk about that very specifically in the chapter on our brain. I think our brain in so many ways are the most important part of our body. But an easy thing to keep in mind is that what's good for your heart, and we all know the ingredients that are good for your heart, is generally what's also good for your brain. And that kind of simplifies the process. The brain health issue, huge. I have Unfortunately, my mom had dementia, and to watch her go down that rabbit hole was just one of the worst experiences of my life. My grandmother also had dementia, so it runs in my family. So it's something of huge concern to me, and it's really one of the reasons that I am such an exercise fanatic. I really get that if I don't exercise, it may, in fact, not just impact my physical health, but my brain health. And I recognize the fact that my health does not end at my neck. It really continues on to my brain. So that's one thing. Should I go
Really,
on?
really yes, keep going. Yep.
Okay,
Please.
purpose, the idea of purpose. We know that we talked about social connections. In one of our age wave studies, one of the really interesting things that we learned is we asked people, where do you get your sense of purpose? And the number one way that people got a sense of purpose was spending time with family. So you can see how closely some of these ingredients interact with each other and having a sense of purpose. Now, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm starting my own nonprofit or I'm reinventing myself. It could be like having a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe it's to walk your dog. That's a great reason to get out of bed in the morning or take care of your grandchildren. So there's a variety of different things that we can do to have a sense of purpose. And again, I want to underline, it does not have to be something huge. It could,
Right.
Mark Friedman, who, as we both know, is a huge proponent of social being and purpose to age well. He talks about purpose with a big P, which are the things like starting a new job or becoming an entrepreneur, or purpose with a little p, which are some of the things we just mentioned, making sure you have time with friends. That's purpose with a little p, or adopting a pet. By the way, in a study that we've done at AgeWave, we found that when we asked people, "Well, what's the one thing you'd be willing to do to have more purpose in your life?" Adopting a pet came in as number one. I
Really?
thought that was great.
Yeah. That's the companionship and all too, plus a reason to get out of bed and
Oh, no, I know.
both of
I know.
those. Yeah.
We have
And
a
what
rescue
about
dog.
oh, you have yeah, go ahead.
We have a rescue dog. She's a tripod, and
Yeah.
I don't know, she just makes my life so much richer. It's incredible.
Yeah, pets are
Anyway, the last
charming.
thing you wanted me to talk
Yeah.
about, which is also a very important thing, is that health wealth connection. Not many books on longevity and Healthspan and Brainspan talk about the whole idea of wealth span, or the ability to have enough money to last through your lifetime. It's a very integral piece of the puzzle, because if you don't have financial security when you're in your 80s and 90s, and let's say that you do have a health issue that comes up, that health issue could come up from the stress of not really feeling financially insecure. That can actually create stress. And that stress can manifest in your body as inflammation. And that inflammation could manifest as a disease of some sort. So you might get diabetes or heart disease, and then you may not even have the financial resources to access the healthcare system the way you want. It's this vicious circle. Finances
Right.
is an integral piece of the puzzle. And one of the things that came up in one of the studies that we've done at AgeWave is we looked up the word wealth, which, by the way, has a really bad rap in the United States. People think of it as entitlement. But when we went back to where the etymology of the word, what we saw was that it came from the Welsh word welle, and welle means well being. And that's how I think about it. I think about wealth or as being well-being. And yeah, there's some simple things that we can do to really increase our wealth span, which can really impact our health span and our brain span, and even our lifespan.
Mhm. I think they're important. And there actually have been some studies in terms of women of just the stress as you're talking about of outliving one's money or becoming a bag lady, of just not being able, because women often do outlive men, of the fear. And I think you're talking about it being, it's so interesting because it used to be that in terms of retirement, people only focused on money. And now in
Right.
terms of the holistic thing, it's why we say money and health and wellness are such big parts of the puzzle, trying to
Absolutely.
make it all work for yourself,
And they work together.
and work together. Yep. So what if somebody, because you have a whole section on, say somebody wants to start to change something. Maybe talk a little about your assessment and then the charting your own path and the steps and the power of small steps. I just think that may be helpful for some of the listeners to hear from you.
Yeah. So I originally wasn't even going to put in a chapter in charting your path. My publisher
Okay.
said to me, "No, I think you need to talk about this." And so because it's hard. We all
Yeah.
struggle with trying to make changes in our lives and make changes that stick. And so I talked to a lot of psychologists and preventative health experts about, well, what should we do? And there were two different approaches. I think your listeners ought to be aware of the two different approaches. So
Yep.
let's say, Dory, somebody's pretty healthy like you. I'm assuming you're pretty healthy. And you're
Knock on
probably
wood.
doing a lot of the right things anyway. If you want to make changes, what Dr. Stephen Kopecki from the Mayo Clinic, and he's the head of preventative health there. He's also a cardiologist. He said, you know what? Start with one thing. And what he recommended, although I don't necessarily, this is just his opinion, he said, start with a change in your diet. if you can get rid of those ultra-processed foods, get rid of the seed oils that are in our lives, get rid of most of the sugar and most of the alcohol, you're going to start feeling so much better that it's going to make you want to exercise. And then when you start exercising, you're going to be sleeping better and so on. So it has a cascading positive effect. And sure, it's going to take longer, but that's okay because you're going to have great success and eventually you will get to each and every one of the holistic ingredients, which, by the way, he agreed completely with the different ingredients. On the other hand, I spoke to Dr. Dean Ornish, and he's with Preventative Health. I'm not going to get the name of his organization exactly, but he is world famous for the work he's done in reversing heart disease. And what he said to me was that what Dr. Ornish, I've known Dean for many years, so we're friends. He said to me, wow, if you have heart disease or stroke, or you're dealing with some disease, maybe diabetes, you need to take more action because if you take many of these ingredients, let's say improving your sleep, and I can give you some simple ways to do that, by the way, and changing your diet and beginning to exercise and very consciously getting out there and connecting socially with people and so on. He said, you are going to feel so much better, so much more quickly, and your biologic aging, or that second kind of aging that we talked about, the biologic or physiologic aging, is going to improve vastly in a very short amount of time. Depending on what your goals are, is dependent on how you approach this. Now, let me just add another piece to the puzzle here. In some of the studies we've done at AgeWave, what we found was there is something that we call the intention action gap. Women tend to, not all women, but about 40% of women, they understand what some of the key ingredients are. They may not know all of them, but they know some of them. But there's a gap between knowing and doing. And you need to close that gap. And one of the ways that I think is critical to closing that gap is to understand the fact that you are, according to the most recent research, that 90% of our health and being is within our control, that you are at the helm of your own health and being, that you need to take control because nobody's going to do it for you. And if you get sick and can't, there's a cascade of negative effects that can happen when you don't take control. Just as one example, I had one of my husband's friends from high school contacted me when she found out that I had gotten rid of all the hip pain I had and said, wow, what do I do? And I told her, and she said to me, oh, that is way too hard. I'm not going to do it. And then, so she didn't. And then she got back to me like literally 2 years later, and she said, I'm so much worse. I can't even believe I've gone through this cascade of now I can barely sleep at night. My exercise is terrible. Help. I need help. And we talked about the steps she could take because she had gotten herself into such a rut of bad health that she was willing to take action steps. You don't want to get to that place.
Absolutely. And the beauty of the book, too, is talking about really just trying to, there's not going to be time to go into all of that, but just know there are a whole lot of tips on how to change habits, how to reward yourself, how to try to make changes to the best of our ability. We don't go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I want to integrate a few. So I have a few questions from Melinda from Studio City. The first is, would you expand a bit more on exercise? For example, yoga and Tai Chi. It's not weight bearing, it doesn't have the weights, but thoughts on if that's good to do?
Oh, first of all, I think it's great to do. Tai Chi, if you ever spend any time in China and go to any of the parks, hundreds of older adults all doing the Tai Chi movements. And it's great for your balance and for your flexibility and your posture. It isn't weight bearing though. Yoga's a little bit different because there are postures in yoga that in fact are weight bearing. Even a downward dog, there's a certain amount of weight bearing involved. Is it perfect for that? No, but it helps with the weight bearing exercise. And it's also, again, great for your balance, great for your posture, for your flexibility. All of these things really matter as we get older. Is being able to combine. Personally, I love Pilates because it is weight bearing, but it also works on my balance, on my posture, on my flexibility. So I feel like I'm combining a lot of different things because I can't spend my entire day, as much as I might like to, exercising.
Great. She asked another question. Is it still timely or appropriate for someone in their 70s with bone density issues, et cetera, to also consider seeking out and consulting with a hormone specialist?
I think it's worth getting out there and talking to a hormone specialist. Yes, definitely. A menopause specialist in particular, if you're feeling some of the physical and psychological impacts of the loss of estrogen, I would, yes, yes, and yes again.
And maybe try to find a menopause specialist, somebody who really,
Yeah.
kind of knows
There
what
is
they're
a
saying.
website, and
Yeah.
I don't have it off the top of my head, unfortunately, but I can give it to you to give out to your listeners because
Okay.
I would strongly recommend that people do. And by the way, in each of the chapters, you alluded to this. One of the challenges that I had is I wanted to be able to reach women who were just beginners or those who were a little bit more advanced in their practice of increasing healthspan and brainspan, and when I might add. At the end of each chapter, I say, if you do one thing, do this. If you're a beginner, try this. If you're more advanced and want to see how far you can take this, try this. And I thought that was like a useful vehicle. By the way, I didn't even come up with that myself. My publisher suggested it when I told her how I was struggling with trying to figure this one out. I was lucky I had a great publisher with the Mayo Clinic Press.
Yeah, and it sounds like the publisher had some really good suggestions. That doesn't always happen anymore, but sometimes it does
Yeah,
happen.
I never sung the praises of a publisher before, but I do sing the praises of them, and they've been
Yeah.
very supportive and helpful. I would also say, because I am not a doctor, that just having the Mayo Clinic brand behind me felt like an important thing to do.
And you really have had access, I think, through Age Wave and just all of your other work and stuff. You've had access to so many incredible people to get their inputs. It's really great. Let me just
Thank you.
let's see, a couple more people. Virginia, I think you've answered Virginia from San Diego's question in the sense that the book is helpful for beginners as well as her question is what help's available for the many women who haven't planned and aren't healthy enough to work. So they're just trying to make it on Social Security. Any thoughts on?
Yeah, one thing I would say that it's kind of cliche, and I hate throwing out cliche things, but one of the things that the financial services industry puts out there is that it's never too late. And I do think that's true, that there are steps you can take no matter where you are in the process. And I do talk about some of the knowledge that you can gain by immersing yourself in the language even of financial services. And some of that information is very available online. Trusted resources are available. If you look in Ageless Aging, I list some of them. The other thing that I think is really important is Social Security and Medicare in particular. Very confusing. You need a PhD in Medicare in order to understand it. So I do try to unpack that in the book because we all need to understand what is it and why is it costing me money when I thought it was something that was free, that was given to me by the government, because it's not.
Right. It's so confusing. Speaking from personal experience, I've been covered with my husband's insurance and we're having to switch as of June 1st. And I found through the advice of a friend, there's an organization called Shine, SHINE,
Mhm.
that you can access generally through senior centers or councils on aging. It was so helpful to demystify some things. I just want, I'm going to throw that out there. Just
Yeah,
check
that's a
out
great
Shine if
thing.
you
Any
need
resources.
information on that or any kind of resource. But yeah. So Jennifer from Seattle asks, she says, with the increase in women caring for aging partners, parents, and the stress it creates, what do you recommend as first steps to consistently take care of ourselves?
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a really important question. So thank you for asking it. Women provide 80% of all caregiving activities, whether it be for parents or in laws or even grandparents, as well as for children. And what we've seen happen over the years is that as women spend more time caring for the people that they love, it takes a toll on their health. So that they need to also prioritize their own health. A couple things that you can do is every day take a 30-minute walk. Just get out of the house and take a walk. And if you can do it outdoors, even better, because being outside in nature is a really helpful thing to be doing. Second, I think that I'd go back to some of the basics of eating really healthy food and providing that same healthy food for the person you're caring for. Third, make sure that you have a support system yourself, not just that you're in this alone. By the way, from studies we've done at AgeWave, we find that most caregivers, they really feel like it's an honor to be caring for someone that they love. On the other hand, they don't need to be doing it completely alone. They ought to be getting some help and support from other family members and or friends. So I would definitely suggest taking those steps. Interacting with other people, by the way, is a really good thing to do. If you can join, maybe there's a caregiving group that you can take part in through a church or a synagogue. That would be a good thing to do. So those are a few things that come to mind. But the one thing I would say is to make sure that you're prioritizing your own health as well as the health and well-being of those you're caring for.
Can't underscore that enough.
Yeah.
Melinda from Studio City said that she found a link to the North American Menopause
Oh, good.
Society to
Thank you,
locate
Melinda.
specialists, and it's www.menopause.org. And then you can search for specialists in your area. And I know I want to honor your time. I know you need to stop in a minute or so. This has been wonderful. You want to just tell people how about a website and
Sure.
then maybe a final takeaway? I'd love to have you stay longer, but I understand you have something else like in about
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Thank you
How
for having me, Dory.
thank you.
Let's see. Okay, getting the book is it's available at bookstores everywhere, online, in person, independent bookstores. It's Ageless Aging: A Woman's Guide to Increasing Health Span, Brain Span, and Lifespan. And if you go to my website, which you can spell my name, it's a miracle, but www.maddydychtwald.com, you will be able to, if you buy a copy, access some free gifts that we're giving away that can really help you in your quest for a more ageless aging. Yeah, and by the way, they're great. They're checklists. They're more interviews with some of the top experts in brain health and financial well-being, which are two often overlooked pieces of the puzzle.
Great. And any final just thought it's a wonderful book and there's so many tips in it. You talk to so many phenomenal people. What final takeaway would you like to leave with people?
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind is that first, remember that we need to plan for a 100-year life path because most of us are going to be living longer than we expect. And keep that in mind when you're thinking about your health, whether it be physical, mental, financial, psychological. You need to keep that in mind. So that's one thing. Second, is there are things that you can do that don't have to cost a penny to increase your health span your brain span and your lifespan. And I think this is an important point because so many books out there on longevity are like written really with the wealthy in mind, because longevity has been in the space of more affluent people. It needs to be democratized. We all need to have access to increasing our health span, our brain span, and lifespan. And that's one of the things I tried to do with this book for women. That's my last 2 points.
Great. Thank you again for taking the time. And I totally recommend your book. Again, Ageless Aging, A Woman's Guide to Increasing Health Span, Brain Span, and Lifespan. Maddy just said. So thanks for taking the time, and be well and safe. And thanks for sharing so much of your own experience in the book, because I think that makes it even more readable. It's really good for just the layperson, anybody to read. So I heartily recommend it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you so much.
The accomplishment. So take care, everybody. And thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.